The police lights flashing at the end of the street were the last thing Ethan Cole expected that morning, but what shocked the entire neighborhood wasn't the police arrival. It was the moment everyone realized Ethan owned something no one knew about. Ethan had lived on Maple Ridge Lane for almost 3 years. His house sat quietly at the corner of the street, surrounded by tall oak trees and a wide lawn that gave the place a peaceful feeling. He liked the privacy, he liked the quiet, and most importantly, he liked the fact that the property wasn't part of any homeowners association. That freedom had been one of the main reasons he bought it, but apparently, someone on the street believed otherwise. The trouble started when Linda Barrett moved into the newly built house across the road. Within days, she began introducing herself to everyone as the HOA coordinator for the neighborhood. Most people politely nodded and moved on. Ethan did the same the first time she knocked on his door, but the second time was different. Linda stood on his porch holding a clipboard and a stack of papers. "You'll need to remove that fence," she said firmly. Ethan blinked. "My fence?" "Yes," she replied confidently. "It violates HOA landscaping guidelines." Ethan stared at her calmly, then he said the one sentence that started everything: "I'm not in your HOA." Linda's smile disappeared immediately. And the reaction that followed would soon bring police cars to the street. Linda's expression hardened the moment Ethan said those words. "Everyone on this street is in the HOA," she replied sharply. Ethan shook his head calmly. "Not this property." Linda tapped her clipboard impatiently. "That's impossible." Ethan leaned casually against the doorframe. "When I bought this house, the title paperwork clearly showed it wasn't included in the association." Linda didn't seem convinced. Instead, she walked toward the fence he had built along the side yard. "This structure violates HOA appearance rules," she insisted. Ethan folded his arms. "Those rules don't apply here." For a moment, neither of them spoke, then Linda gave a tight smile. "We'll see about that." She walked away quickly. Ethan assumed that would be the end of it, but 2 days later another letter appeared on his porch. Official HOA notice. It demanded he remove the fence within 7 days or face fines. Ethan stared at the paper for a long moment, then he quietly placed it in a drawer, because he knew something Linda clearly didn't, and when she eventually found out the truth, the entire street would be stunned. The following weekend, Ethan was outside trimming the hedges when a car suddenly stopped in front of his driveway. Linda stepped out. This time she wasn't alone. 2 uniformed police officers followed behind him. Several neighbors peeked out from their windows. Linda pointed directly at Ethan's fence. "That's the property violating HOA rules," she told the officers. One of the officers approached Ethan calmly. "Sir, we received a complaint about a property dispute." Ethan nodded politely. "Yes, I figured." The officer glanced at the fence. "Are you part of the homeowners association here?" Ethan shook his head. "No, I'm not." Linda interrupted immediately. "That's not true. Everyone here is." Ethan didn't argue. Instead, he calmly walked inside his house. A moment later he returned carrying a folder. The officer opened the documents and began reading carefully, then his eyebrows slowly lifted. Linda watched nervously. "What does it say?" she demanded. The officer looked up. "Well, this is interesting." But the full explanation would change the entire neighborhood. The officer turned the document toward Linda. "This property isn't part of the HOA," he said calmly. Linda frowned. "That can't be right." The officer continued reading. "In fact, according to the property records." He paused. "Mr. Cole owns several parcels along this street." Ethan remained quiet. Linda looked confused. "What parcels?" The officer flipped another page. "The vacant lots, the corner land near the park, and the empty strip behind the new houses." Several neighbors had gathered nearby now. They listened carefully as the officer continued. "It appears those properties were purchased years ago by the same owner." Linda crossed her arms. "And what does that have to do with this fence?" The officer closed the folder. "It means Mr. Cole doesn't answer to the HOA." The street fell silent, but Ethan still hadn't revealed the most surprising part yet. Linda looked around at the growing crowd of neighbors. "This doesn't make any sense," she insisted. Ethan finally spoke. "When the development was planned 10 years ago, the builder bought most of the land here." Several neighbors nodded. They remembered hearing about that project. But before the HOA documents were finalized, Ethan continued, "Some parcels were sold separately." Linda stared at him. "And?" Ethan gestured down the street. "I bought them." The neighbors exchanged surprised looks. Linda blinked slowly. "How many?" Ethan smiled slightly. "Almost the entire block." A quiet murmur spread through the crowd. The officer nodded. "The documents confirm it." Linda suddenly looked much less confident. "But the HOA rules only apply to properties inside the association," the officer said calmly, "and his property isn't." Linda stood frozen. But the biggest twist still hadn't happened yet. The officer handed the folder back to Ethan. "Everything here looks completely valid," he said. Linda's voice grew quieter. "So there's nothing we can do?" The officer shook his head. "This is a private property matter, and it appears Mr. Cole is fully within his rights." The police returned to their car soon after. Neighbors slowly drifted back toward their homes, but many of them were still whispering about what they had just learned. Ethan watched quietly from his porch. Linda remained standing near the sidewalk. Her confident expression from earlier had completely vanished. Finally she spoke. "You never told anyone you owned all that land?" Ethan shrugged gently. "No one asked." For a moment she looked like she might argue again, but instead she simply turned and walked back toward her house. The street slowly returned to silence, yet everyone knew the neighborhood would never feel quite the same again. Over the next few weeks, something interesting happened on Maple Ridge Lane. The HOA letters stopped appearing, the complaints disappeared, and the neighbors who once avoided Ethan now greeted him with curious smiles. They had all learned the same lesson. Sometimes the quietest person on the street knows far more than anyone realizes. Ethan never bragged about owning the land. He never mentioned the incident again. He simply enjoyed the peace and privacy he had always valued. But one thing had definitely changed. No one questioned his fence anymore, and no one knocked on his door with HOA papers, because the entire neighborhood now understood something Linda had learned the hard way. The person she tried to control was actually the one who owned the ground beneath their feet, and that was the final twist in this unbelievable HOA story. If you love the drama, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment sharing your thoughts. It really helps this channel grow.